Hello, John.
Hello, Oliver.
And today we're going to talk about the travellers in Ireland, particularly the amount of travellers that are in prison. 50% of travellers in Castlereagh prison are travellers. So.
Yes, and apparently overall, while the number, a very small percentage of the population, something like 1% or something, that the number in 10% of them are in prison.
50% of the prisoners are travellers in Castlereagh prison.
Well, that's Castlereagh, but I mean overall 10% of them are in prison. I don't know why there are so many of them in Castlereagh, because I think the regime in Castlereagh is very relaxed, and as a matter of fact I think it's fairly relaxed in most prisons except for those that are really very dangerous mass murderers and that kind of thing. But otherwise it's a very relaxed atmosphere prison. While their freedom might be curtailed a bit, they have a lot of extras that in times past they wouldn't have had.
Little luxuries.
Yeah, luxuries, yes. Television and sports and education facilities and all the rest of it.
Rehabilitation.
Pardon? Rehabilitation. Correct. There's a lot of plus factors. Now, so that's number one. The article that's led to our talking about this was posing the question from various politician, quality man or whatever he is, or woman, and the probation service talking about it as if like that somehow or other they'd have to do a study of why somebody was in prison, etc., etc. So my opinion is very straightforward in the point of view of that people that are called travellers did have years ago, used to have a trade before they got a lot of the handouts now that they got subsequently when people, there was very little social welfare in the country because we couldn't afford it. So they were people that were involved in the metalwork. They made pots and things like that, and I remember they also fixed pots because people couldn't afford to be buying basic items like that too often. They were able to put a patch on them and that, so you had a pot going for longer than it would. The same as fathers often mended your shoes and cut us, and then there was people fixing shoes as well. So you had all this sort of what would I call it, trades, and people doing things because of necessity. And the travellers were at that, and they did that, and they went around in caravans. They didn't have, generally speaking, a particular spot where they could call home. And this is often considered to me, I would have thought, not too good for them. Now, but then it was regarded as part of their culture. Now, that's a dangerous road to go down because straight from that, like they're Irish, so there's certain responsibilities falls on your shoulders in that way, is to obey the law and so that then is a necessity for us all. People break the law, people commit drugs, the drug trade, and I think in some cases there was some people that would be from the traveller community involved in that. So like there is laws that has to be obeyed, and unfortunately because of the way the people from the traveller community congregate together so much, they don't mix, and I think if you don't mix with the wider community gradually, then you're going to lose out, or you're going to cause problems for yourself and for your family as well.
That's it. I remember 30 years ago I was talking to the principal of the school, and he says to me, "Oliver, there's two things I know about the travellers." And I said, "What's that?" And he says, "You'll never see a bald one, and you'll never see one wearing glasses. That was his observations.
Aye, what did he think about the schooling? Did he have any opinion about that?
Well, his impression was that the travelling community didn't go to school. Of course, that's changed now. I mean, they are going to school.
Well, you see, school now was not teaching the things, the sort of the Catholic and Christian religion and viewpoint, the way they taught, like things were, there was a culture of goodness in some ways in schools and in primary school and in secondary school. But I think like that from the point of view of the travellers and the question in the prisons and that, like if you break the law, you're going to be in prison, why that travellers should be breaking the law. I think the fact that they're not working, and then there's the question if they're not trained to work in industry. You see, it's where you're going to find a solution for the particular problem. I think the tragedy is in this country, this kind of secular type of old nonsense that passes for policy. If people are not, if they're all banded together like what the travellers do, it's not conducive to sort of enter the mainstream, to sort of live law-abiding, good lives. The first thing is that a lot of them are now in housing, but they're all together beside one another in housing. And then in some cases there's been feuds with travellers because all that proximity can have problems, you know. I think like that they should be dispersed in some ways, in a reasonable way, not to interfere with this culture, because the culture, if it represents such an amount in prison, 10% of their adults, and not counting those ones that perhaps should be in prison that are breaking the law. Now, unfortunately, we've got to sort of be realistic about it and not be soft-soaping as some of the people in government tend to do. They go all around the world for sport without dealing with the actual problem. And the problem is all this sticking together because of culture. I mean, I'm Irish and I stick with others, you know, I'm living in my own country, but now there's a lot of people from other jurisdictions and I'm expected to do all sorts, but they don't mix with me or want to. And we've got to be realistic and practical about it. The governments tend to make grandiose statements that doesn't bear with actual practical solutions, and the practical solution is that people from the travelling community need to mix and need not to be in these ghettos, because that's what becomes if you're all the one crowd or sort of people is together. Forget about the culture, they're Irish and that's the main culture, not that they're travellers. Irish citizens with responsibilities. So the best thing for the solution there, in my opinion, is that they live in houses not all together the way they are and causing problems. And the wider community, and some of them are engaged in criminal activity, robbing people and all the rest of it. So you can't do things like that. But if you're in this ghetto and you're not working in a meaningful job, but getting money right, left and centre from the social welfare and from this, that and the other, because they often have large families, so they're getting a lot of money, and that can be dangerous if you're not gainfully employed and getting your money that way. So the solution is, I think, for them to recognise the problem that they have and stop talking about culture and focusing on that and trying to make a square peg out of a round hole. You just look at the situation, but they think together too much like that and running their lives completely different than the Irish culture, if you like.
I think the government and their handling of the situation has been fairly poor. They introduced the Equality Act in 2001 thereabouts, up until then, the Irish travellers weren't served in pubs and hotels in various places. You know, they were always refused. And but then the government introduced a law overnight. Travellers were allowed to go into pubs and go into hotels. But this caused a problem because it was a kind of a culture shock for both the travellers and the settled community, because they have two different ways of life and they have two different ways of socialising. So what actually happened then was the publicans kind of shut down on them and they said, "I'm sorry, we're not serving you." And then the government had tribunals and did various things that they were paying for the traveller to sue the pub. And this created a divide in society, because then what was happening was they were suing pubs around Ireland. They were getting 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 euros for discrimination cases. And this set the community against the traveller and created a further divide because they were seen as getting easy money.
Well,
that was wrong.
Well, there's that, but I think the other problem about that, unfortunately, was that because they kind of grouped together like that, and especially going to funerals and such like, and it's not just a few travellers, but a whole heap of them, the one crowd coming into one establishment, and starting off a kind of half right, and before you know where you are, there's a row. Because there's, like with people, there can be enmities. All this sort of one crowd from that particular sector really taking over a pub, and the next thing is and harm and damage done to the publican, and stuff was destroyed. Now, you know, what can publicans do? What can anybody do? You see, you don't want a big crowd from the one sort of crowd, like the travellers all coming together that haven't seen one another probably for a good bit, and they're all right at the start, and then the next thing is there's rows. So that has happened.
That's right.
There's no point in denying that it hasn't. So, and I'm sure the travellers would, if you were to ask them sort of beforehand, they wouldn't like it. But sometimes there's a lot of enmities between travelling families. So these are the real problems. So I think it's the fact that they go en masse into places. It's nothing to do with the business of suing individuals like that, because a lot of pubs in towns often closed now because of this thing, so they can't be sued because they're closed.
You mentioned religion there earlier on. It's ironic that 50% of the travellers will be in any prison, because religiously, I mean, they're strong Catholic. They have a strong Catholic
Correct.
faith.
That's the plus factor, and that's why I think like that somehow or other they're, I don't know who's responsible for kind of segregating them like that, the way that they live and the way they gather together, even when they're in houses.
If you go into a traveller's house, it's very likely that when you walk in the front door, you will see a big shrine to Our Lady, or you'll see something very religious in the house.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, that's a good thing in one sense. But you see, religion is more than just pictures. You've got to live a kind of a Christian life as well, and you've got to respect your fellow man. Now it works both ways, like, but like if there's a group like travellers all kind of together like that, they pose a kind of a threat to other society. Same as any group. Now there's a worry about some of the people that has come from abroad, from particular cultures. I'll just give you one small example, the same type of thing. Muslims stick together, and in Britain there was a problem with Muslims, particularly from Pakistan, that were in a place called Rochdale and were abusing and young white women and having them as prostitutes and making a lot of money on the poor devils, and the police knew about it, but because the ones that were doing it were coloured, they did nothing about it. And then when it did hit the media or hit the airwaves, it was considered a disgrace that they did that, and inquiries and all the rest of it. Now, this is very important to sort of realise that whereas any group is gathered together, it's dangerous. We have in this country now a lot of Muslims, and they are now beginning to demand certain things in this business of schools that we were talking about, the practice of the Catholic faith. They won't be they won't be minimising what they stand for. And I understand there's some criticism of Croke Park, that they intend to sort of take over Croke Park, and perhaps animals will be slaughtered the way they slaughtered them, which is a very kind of, to our ways of thinking, inhuman.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, that's a group that could be considered dangerous because they stick together. They don't mix with the Christian community, and in those places where they're in charge, the Christian community is persecuted. So these are all problems to do with groups that are like that. Catholics are not practicing that type of life. They don't all band together and keep everybody out. They're kind of welcoming.
Yeah.
But they can't be taken advantage of either, as I was speaking about earlier. So from the point of view of the travellers in the jail and that, I think the solution is very simple, that to concentrate on the fact that they're Irish citizens with responsibilities, and then to devise a system so as they can be I won't say rehabilitated, but that they can be spoken to in such a way as they can kind of disperse a bit and get the jobs that they're well able to do, I'd say.
In other words, integrate.
Yes, and not to be living in these what I call ghettos, because anybody that's all sticking together like that, it's a form of a ghetto, and nothing good ever happens from it. You want to mix and try to further education, and not just education, but the really responsibilities of your life.
That's it. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you very much, Oliver.